Hey guys, so this is my second tutorial on how to make weapons for Blade and Sorcery. My first one had a few mistakes, so I'm gonna delete that and correct myself in this guide. So first you want to get Unity. So to do that, you go on to unity3d.com/get-unity/download, as you can see here. Once done, you download Unity Hub, and you'll have this window. If you've never made a weapon before, then you won't have any projects. However, if you did, make sure that it is on version 2019.4.21f1. If you've never made a weapon before, go to Installs, Add. You won't find the proper release here, so we go into Download Archive, go to Unity 2019.x, and scroll down until you come across 2019.4.21, for which you download via Unity Hub. Once that's done, Unity Hub will open back up, and you'll be greeted with the install. Meanwhile, while that downloads, you want to go on to github.com/cosby/bass_SDK as seen here. You'll be greeted with this screen here. So to download it, you can either do it through GitHub Desktop, or you can download the zip file. Once you downloaded the zip file, you should be brought to the SDK master, which is a folder that looks like this. Now that Unity is done, we want to go to Projects, click on New, highlight Universal Render Pipeline, call it whatever you like, with whatever location, and click Create. That will open a new project for you, and we can get started. So, now that that is open, we're not finished quite yet with the installation. So we want to right click on Assets, Show in Explorer. We should open the tutorial SDK window here. We want to go into that zip file, click into the folder, and drag everything here into here, and make sure that if it asks to replace, to replace. To make sure that you know that your SDK is working, there should be no compile errors here. The console should be blank. Additionally, if we click on any game objects, such as the directional light, and add component, we can make sure that the item script is there. If it is, it means that it worked. Now onto the weapon making. So I have made my own weapon here, which is in tutorial sword, and I have my sword here. To center on your object, you can press F. However, I won't be going over every Unity use here. So now I have my model, which I've modeled. It's as simple as finding a model on Sketchfab or creating one yourself, and just plopping it inside a folder inside your assets. Now I will go onto my Mo's folder. This is the texture that every vanilla weapon in Blade and Sorcery uses, or I've also created a universal render pipeline lit. However, for this, it's a little different. Okay, so I have my weapon here. I'm going to go into my Mo's folder, and I'm going to drag the base color onto the weapon. Now the weapon will go white, so you want to click on it. Click on the drop down for the material that's been generated. Right now, the base is Universal Render Pipeline Lit. So to start off, I will use the Universal Render Pipeline materials. So for URP Lit, I will drag the base color into the base map, the AO into the ambient occlusion or occlusion map. This is the emission map, so you want to tick emission, drag it under emission map, and set the HDR color to 1, 1, 1. Drag the metallic map into the metallic map. And finally, drag the normal map into the normal map. And if it says fix now, press fix now. Now that that is done, we want to add component, and we want to add the paintable script. Please note that this script is not available after U9. So this method is deprecated. To do the correct version, we want to use the Thunder Road Lit shader. Let me just stop that quickly. So to do that, we click on the drop down for shader, Thunder Road Lit. Now I'm going to go into my Mose texture and just apply the Mose texture. To convert your weapons to the Mose or Thunder Road textures, you can follow my other guide which I created on the channel. So I'm going to drag the textures over. The Mose goes into the metallic occlusion emission mask smoothness and my normal map. And I'm just going to remove my emission map as that is included in the Mose map. I'm going to set the smoothness to 1. And the other things I don't really need to change. Now I'll just drop it down and I will add a component called reveal decal. So this is for blood. So what we want to do is we want to go to our material. That's a lie. We go into examples, decal, and you'll see a reveal material here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it via Control D and just drag it into the materials folder that had my material. An easy way to apply the reveal material is to just put it on the weapon, because then we can edit the reveal material with textures here. So we want to move the base color to the base map, the normal map, and the Mose map, like we did with the Thunder Road Lit. And then we want to go down and change layer R normal to the normal map of our weapon. Please make sure that you copy the material, as these components here are necessary for it to work correctly. Now that that is done, I will go back to my materials, assign my normal material onto the sword, and then drag my reveal material into materials. Then you can set the resolution to whatever, so I'm just going to set it to 1024 to make sure that the quality is perfect on the blood. However, 512 is also good enough. Now that we have the mesh render out the way, we can get on to creating our weapon. So first I will right click on the hierarchy, I will create an empty and name it tutorial sword. I will then drag our model onto tutorial sword to make sure that the tutorial sword is now parenting the model. So now if I drag the tutorial sword, it will drag the model with it. Before I get to adding all the components, I want to make sure that the size is correct. So for this, I will go back into the examples, weapons, and I will select a weapon that fits size nicely, which it will be the dagger common. Now, as you can see, the placement of the sword is a bit off, so I'm going to make sure it's 000. I'm going to remove the tag from it. There we go. If it looks strange, for example, the pivot is off on your weapon, you can either click local, which is the local parameter. So as you can see here, the blue arrow is pointing to the z-axis. However, if I rotate it, the axis also rotates. So to change that, you can go up here and set it to global. Additionally, you can also set it to pivot, which is set to the pivoted center of the model itself. Right now, I'm going to keep it on center local. Just rotate it back. So as you can see, the size isn't that bad. I'm going to set it to center once again. So the dagger should be, I'd say the handles should be about the same length. So we want to make sure that our tutorial sword is small or big enough. Do not edit the size of the parent itself. You want to edit the size of the model. Now that should be a successive size. Now that is done, I can just remove the dagger. Now comes on to the main part of weapon making. So, first what we want to do is we want to go into tutorial sword parent and we want to add component item. As you can see, there's now been a holder point, a parry point, and a preview generated. The preview we will get back to later. For the holder point, we want to make sure we're on local for this. The blue arrow must point downwards. So if this sword is on a rack, the blue arrow will point towards the floor. So what I want to do is I want to rotate it, set it down to the hilt, and now on your hips, on your back, or on a rack, it will now set the main point for the rack here, and it will point blade downwards. As for the power point, this is where enemies will try and parry with your weapon. So I just want to set it sort of on top of the blade here. So set it around about here. Now we want to make sure we assign an item ID. So I'm just going to name it tutorial sword. Then I want to drag the holder point onto the holder point. The power point should be done automatically. Now, the first thing we want to add is a handle. I lied. It's a parry script. So the parry script is a bit different to the power point. The parry script lets enemies know your weapon. So we add the parry target. It's horizontal at the moment. If you cannot see the line, you want to make sure the gizmos is turned on up here. So what I want to do is I want to align it with the weapon and then enable point-to-point transform, which allows me to set it to the size of the weapon. You can add multiple parry targets to this weapon as well. So if you have an axe, you can add one onto the handle and onto the blade. Now we want to add colliders. So first what we want to do is we just want to name this blades, as it's easier to reference in the JSON. Please remember that the naming of this object is important. This is the same with damagers also, and handles. So I have blades. Now I want to add component, and I want to add the component collider group. Now here I will right click under blades, create an empty, and this will be the collider. So the blade is obviously set for the blade collider, so I'll be a bit lazy and just add a box collider, set it to 0.1 as a whole, just so it's easier to edit. And then I will edit the collider parameters, just as simple. All the way up. There we go. It's not perfect, but I'm just using this as an example. Then we want to make sure that the material is set to blade. Now that's done, make sure that trigger is not enabled, as this will make it so the collider is not used, unless for scripted circumstances. Now what we want to do is we want to go back onto blades, and we want to generate an imbue mesh. you'll come up with like a pink box, which is under blades. What we want to do is we want to click on it and just disable the mesh renderer. Then for inbuilt emission renderer, we want to drag our model onto it. Now that that's done, I will add another empty, which I'm just going to call handle. So this is another collider group, so add another collider group script. And we're going to be using this for the colliders of the handle. So I'm going to be a little bit lazy and just do a really simple handle. Because this is not going to be imbued, it means that we won't need to assign the emission renderers or anything like that. So this is just my lazy handle. You can be as precise as you really want during this process, but remember that mesh colliders, and a lot of them, can cause a few issues. So I will add metal, then create an empty for the capsule, which I will add a capsule collider. And then finally, I will add another box for the Now, just to note, if you were using a mesh collider, just to show, this will not work, as rigid bodies and weapons and such cannot use non-convex colliders, so you want to tick convex. However, this isn't precise, so you don't really want it like this. So I will just remove it. Make sure that I set the physics material correctly, as so. Now that's done, we want to add the damages. So I will create another empty, and I will name this Pierce. So I will add a damager script. This is for the weapon to deal damage. So I'm just going to add an axe here, just to show you how an axe is done as well. So just to show you, for a sword, the way you set up PS is you move it all the way to the top, set the direction to forward, set the depth to 1 as an example, then you want to rotate it so it goes down the blade. Now this is a bit too far, so you want to change the depth to around about the end of the blade. Now I'm a bit picky, so I like to have this to the tip of the blade, so I will just alter the depth. There we go. And then I will move the collider group blades, because this is only affecting the blade collider, onto the collider group. Please remember that penetration exit on max depth means that if you penetrate it and it hits this point here on the blade, it will unpierce. For an axe, pierce and slash, which I will get onto soon, are kind of combined. So as you can see here, this is how you would do a slash collider. You will have the length and then the depth of how far it is going to go into the axe. Now, for slash, I'm just going to copy the PS damager, because it will still use the collider group blades, but this time I'm going to rotate it on its side, drag it down towards the middle of the blade, set the direction to forward and backwards. All also works here. Now this time I want to add a length, so I'll just set the length to 1 for now. And I will set the penetration depth to a really small number of, say, 0.01. Then I want to make sure that the slash is around about the same size as the blade. For this, you can enable point-to-point transform, of which you can drag it. Now we want to add another damager, which is blunt. Now this will be for the handle. So for this, I'm going to drag the handle collider group onto the collider group this time. Then set the direction to all. I then want to set the length and the depth to 0, and I'm just going to drag it down to the handle for easier sight. The damage for your weapons is now done, so I'll go on to handles. So I will right click my hierarchy again, create an empty, and name it handle. Now there are many ways to do handle, but I'm going to do it in the way that's easiest to understand. I will add the component handle. There we go. And I want to just set the axis length to more than 0, just so we can two-hand this weapon, which will allow point-to-point transform. However, if you're having something like a dagger, where you don't want two hands holding the weapon, you set the axis length to 0, and you can also add the handle itself to release handle, which makes it so it can only be one-handed. Now to make this easier to understand, for allowed orientations, even though it is obsolete, I will still add to it anyway. So I will add 4, set the allowed hand on the top one to both, and it is default to both, and then set the allowed hand to both for everything else, but not the is default. Then for element 0, I will just leave to 0, 0, 0 for the rotation. For element 1, I will do 180 for Z. Then element 2, 180 for Y. And then for element 3, for Y and Z is 180. This won't do anything on its own, so what you want to do is you want to update to the new orientations, and it will do it for you. I can then set the default grab axis ratio, which will make it so it grabs that part automatically when using telekinesis. This rotation may look a little off if rotated differently. So what you can do here is you can just rotate it however you like. You know this is rotated correctly because if you go underneath handle, orient right, you'll be holding it this way according to the hand, which is correct. You don't want to rotate these unless you're doing it another method where you're doing these yourself. Now that that is done, you want to go back into the handle. You can expand allowed orientations, and you want to calculate the reach. This will calculate the reach to the top of the handle, just to show the enemies how far the weapon goes. You want to make sure that it reaches from end to end. Okay, the handle is done. So what I want to do is I want to go back onto my tutorial sword, and I want to move the handle into the main handles. Finally, I want to right click on my tutorial sword, create an empty, and name it fly ref. There is no script added to this weapon. So what I want to do is I want to make sure the blue arrow always points forward. So I will rotate it, again making sure it's on local, move it upwards. So now when you throw your weapon, it will point in that direction when you're throwing it or when it's flying. Then go back onto my tutorial sword and move fly ref to the fly dir ref. Additionally, you could also add your pierce damager onto it. Just for some more information, you can use your own custom center of mass. However, I won't, as this will work perfectly fine as it is. And for custom inertia tensor, You can click that there, it will create inertia tensor collider. This is mainly used for arrows, however it does not matter. I can still use it for this weapon, however it's not very necessary. You do not need to assign a material here, as this is just to make it easier for weapons to fly. So for instance, arrows and daggers and spears will fly a lot better with a tensor collider. Finally, and last but not least, I'm going to add an empty and name it whoosh. I will add the whoosh component, and I will just drag it to the top of the blade because this is where it is going to make noise. Finally, your weapon is done. So what we want to do now is go back into our tutorial sword folder, and I'm going to drag the tutorial sword onto the folder, and I will create a thing called a prefab. It is not done yet though. I will double click on the prefab to open it into prefab editing mode. Now this is where the preview script is going to be used. So I will select my preview, rotate it correctly, make sure that the blue arrow is pointing away from the weapon, as this is what the sight you will have when it's in the book. Now I'm going to rotate it, and you can make it smaller through editing its scale, mainly the Z scale. Then I will generate the icon. It will generate an icon here. However, if I'm not happy with it, I want to rotate it again, I can do so here. Now that the preview is done, we get onto extraction. So extraction is now we can save it here, is now a addressable system. For addressables, we want to go to Window, Asset Management, Addressables, Groups, for which it will open an addressable groups folder. Now I've already created one here in the past, but I'm just going to remove it. So right now you will have the default and the witch broom, which is an example. So for this we can either create group packed assets, or you can right click and create new group here. For this I will press F2 to rename it, or I believe you can right click to rename too. I'm just going to name it tutorial sword. What you can do is you can also drag the addressables here to the top next to inspector to make it easier to see. Now what I want to do is I want to grab my sword. So for this I will grab my prefab, I will drag it under tutorial sword, and then I will also drag my icon. Now the name of these is important as this is what you're going to reference. So for the prefab I will just name it something quite unique so it doesn't conflict with anything. Drags.tutorial sword, and then I will copy that, and for the icon I will just name it that again, but with .icon at the end. Then I will right click the sword and set it to default. Now that that is done, it is ready to extract. So I will go to Thunder Road SDK, Mod Builder. You will open this window here. Now what we want to do is we want to set the folder name. If it's not already created, it will create one for us. So I'm just going to do that really quick. So I will create a new folder called tutorial. I'm going to copy the name of it. So this is the folder we're going to use. We're going to put the mod folder name in there, and then we're going to click build and export. For this, you want to click yes, and you can save the scene as well. Now, while that is extracting, we go into our tutorial folder. So we have our tutorial sword now. So what we want to do is we want to add JSONs. So the first JSON you want to add is the manifest.json. The easiest way to add a manifest is to go into any of your old mods, so I'll just go to my Dragon Slayer. I will copy the manifest, go back into my tutorial folder. As you can see, it's already been extracted here, and I will paste. Do not rename this file. Go into here, and we'll just rename it, so I'll just name tutorial sword. Set your author. The mod version is going to be 1.0. For game version, this is important. As for right now, you want to set it to 9.2. However, if there's another update, we want to set it to 9.3 for all Vortex users. However, as mods work from 9.0 onwards, except for scripted mods, then game version 9.0, 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3 will work fine. So we just save that there. And close it. So now we have our mod extracted. We want to make sure that we have a correct JSON for the weapon. So I'm going to go into streaming assets, default, BAS, then go into items, scroll down until you come across the weapons, and whatever fits your weapon. So for instance, I'm going to add the short sword common, or sword short common. I'm going to copy it, go back to my tutorial folder and just paste it in here. Then we're going to rename it. Make sure the item underscore weapon stays. This is important. And we just want to change the end, so I'm just going to name it tutorial sword. Now that that's done, we go into it. Now you can either edit it with Notepad, however I'm going to edit it with Notepad++. Open here. And these are the things we want to change. So for the ID, we want to make sure this is unique, so I'm just going to name it drags tutorial weapon. Localization ID you want to change to be unique too, so display name is what the name of the weapon you want it to be, so I'm just going to name it tutorial sword. And the description is what is going to be in the book, so I'm just going to call it this is a tutorial sword. Then for author, put yourself. However, if you want, you can also add the creator of the model as the author. Price, you will not need to change. Purchasable, make sure it's true. As if it's not true, it means that the weapon will not be found in the book. Tier, so set what tier you think your weapon is to be. 4 will increase its imbue duration and stuff. This will mainly be used in the future. Ignore this and ignore this. For category path, we can either set it to swords, daggers, whatever is available. Now, the addresses is where it becomes important. So, where we change the names in Unity, right here, is where it's going to be used. So, it'll be the icon address first, which will be drags.tutorialsword.icon. Remember that this is case sensitive. Then for the prefab address, I'm just going to copy this and paste it in here. Now that the icon address is correct, type, make sure that it's a weapon. For slot, so if you set this to small, it means it can only be on your hips. If you set it to medium, it can be on your hips and your back. And if it's set to large, it can be set only on your back. For mass and drag, you can alter these how you please. I'm just going to leave them default, but it'll overall just change the way you hold your weapon. These don't need to be changed. You can set fly to throw from throw if you like. Scrolling down, and we come towards this. So, as showed before in Unity, you have your collider group for blades. So which the collider groups, this is only used for imbue, remember? So the transform name is blades, which is the name of this. And for collider group ID, we want to set it so it's blade sword. However, this is obviously for swords, so axes will have their own, and bows and arrows will have their own, etc. For damages, is exactly the same for the transform name. This is important here. And we will add the damager IDs. All the damages can be found in the default folder under damages. Interactables is again the handle, so the transform name is important here. And set the interactable IDs to the interactables, which you can find in the interactables folder in the default folder. And then we have whoosh here. Your weapon is now ready to try in game. I hope that this tutorial has helped. Good luck making weapons. See you.